Yay, it's art time, and I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back. Today our video is covering our 3 basic watercolor techniques and our 3 basic texture techniques. You can find both of these sets of 3 on their own video, but here we're going to combine them into one. This video is going to be a little bit faster pace, so feel free to pause between techniques and you can use this to cover 6 basic techniques quickly. Your list of supplies will be on the screen, and when you're ready, join me and let's start painting. All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm so excited to dive into these 6 techniques with you today. First thing we're going to do is we are going to divide our paper into 6 boxes. So I like to go in half and then do 2 lines up and down. Again, this does not have to be perfect and they do not have to be perfectly even. Don't panic. Awesome. So our first technique here is our very basic Watercolor 101 technique. We call that a wash. Okay, so we're going to start with a wet brush. Did I say wet or dry brush? Wet brush. So I have my wet brush. I'm going to wipe off the extra water on the side. I'm going to choose a color, any color, and I'm going to swirl it 3 times. Ready? 1, 2, 3. And then we paint. Awesome. So remember, if you want your color to be lighter in the wash, you can always add a little bit of water to lighten it. If your wash is a little bit too light, you can always rinse your brush and swirl a couple more times in your pigment to make it darker. So this technique is great for just a solid wash of color. If you'd like 2 colors mixed together, we're going to use our next technique. We call this technique wet on wet. So I bet you can guess we're using a wet brush or a dry brush for this. You got it. So we're going to start with a wet brush. Did I say wet brush or dry brush? Wet brush. We're going to just gently take a little bit off the sides. We're going to start with your lighter color. So for me, I'm going to start with yellow. Again, we're going to start with swirling how many times? 3. 1, 2, 3. And we're going to lay down some pigment. Now mine's a little bit light, so I'm going to go back in here, swirl a little bit more and lay it down, and I might want even more pigment, so I'm just going to really get in there. There we go. So now that we've got our wash, we're going to rinse our brush really well, and then we're going to choose our darker color. Okay, so I'm going to go with orange. Start with a little bit. You can always go back in and add more. And when you put your color on top, you should start to see them blending. Now, sometimes it takes a minute. If it's taking too long to blend, what I like to do is just take a brush with just water and you can kind of run it over the edge. And again, if you want it darker, feel free to add a little bit more pigment. There you go. And you can see our color is starting to blend. Again, if you're impatient, you want it to go a little bit faster, just go ahead and take a wet brush with just water and you can run that over the crease. Beautiful. So let's say we want to make a painting where we have a background with something on top, but it does not mix. You will use our next technique. We're going to paint dry on top of wet. To make it easier, especially if you're working with an elementary class, I just like to call it dry brush. All right, so we're going to start with a wash. So start with a wet brush. We're going to put down our wash. Beautiful. And if we do not want things to mix, we're going to go on top of this with dry. So I'm going to, again, rinse my brush really well. Wipe off. You're going to grab a paper towel. And remember, squeeze, don't pull those bristles. We're just going to squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. And then we're going to choose our next color. Now remember, it might take a couple, if you've got like a dry pigment in here, it's going to take a couple extra swirls. If you have a pigment like this one, you can see it's kind of shiny already. It's a little bit wet. You won't need that much. And when you paint on top, it should not mix. If it's mixing, that means your brush is a little bit too wet and you need to dry it out a little more. Okay, so our first 3 techniques are all painting techniques. Our second 3 techniques, we're going to explore texture. So our first texture technique, we're going to be using a paper towel to dab it to give us a texture. So for this one, you can call it towel or dab texture. Okay, so we are going to start this one with a dark, wet wash. Make sure that you've got a nice amount of water. So let's go ahead and pick, I don't know, we'll just do this pretty blue again. I'm gonna need a little bit more. I'll show you what you're looking for here. Okay, so what we're looking for is when you tilt the page, you want to see that light bounce off it. So see how the light bounces off here, but not so much maybe on this one. This one's a little drier. So this one's too dry. If it's too dry, it's not going to work. Or same thing for our dry brush up here. You don't really see any light bounce off of that, do you? Here, you got a nice amount of light bouncing off. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And if you're worried, you can just add a little bit more water. And that's going to make it a little bit easier. You're going to take a paper towel, and honestly, paper towels that aren't super absorbent I think work a little better than like the super absorbent ones. So mine are absorbent. Let's see what we can get here. But we're going straight down and straight up. Perfect. Make sure you don't rub these and don't over dab it, because what we're looking for is a cool texture left behind. Awesome. For our next texture technique, we're going to be using salt. So we call this the salt texture. Cool. So for this, you are going to be using salt. Now, I didn't realize till I started doing watercolor with this that there are so many different types of salt, and each salt kind of gives you a little bit of a different effect. The one that I'm using today and the one that I think I like the best is kosher salt. And the reason I like it is because it's a thicker, I guess a grain of salt, and they're not all exactly the same. If you use like just a regular table salt, it's going to be a smaller effect and sometimes it's hard to see. But if you're using like a kosher salt or like a sea salt, it's going to be a bit of a bigger grain and a little bit flakier, and it's going to work really nicely. So for this technique, we're again going to start with a very dark, very wet wash. So I'm going to start with, again, a wet brush here. I'm going to pick this pretty blue. 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to go 5 just because I want it to be darker. Oh, and that's pretty light. Let's try again. 2, 3, 4, 5. This light again. I might switch colors. That might work. All right. Actually, I'm going to go with a darker purple here because I want to make sure this shows up. So you can do a wet on wet here to be extra fancy if you want. There we go. All right, friends, so this is what we're looking for. Same as before, you want to see that light bounce off. So see how my light's bouncing off? That's what we're looking for. And check out where this pigment is kind of darker in the corner. If I tilt my page and it starts to run, that's how you know you have enough water. So you want to make sure, oh, let me move here, that your light's bouncing off, and when you move it, you can see that pigment run. That's when you know you're in the right spot in your setup. If this is too dry, it won't work. Once you've got your light bouncing off and your pigment is running, you're going to take your salt and sprinkle it on. And I always say the hardest part about this technique is just being patient and waiting. What's going to happen here, I'll see if I can get you a close up. What's going to happen, you can already see it starting, is the salt's going to absorb the water and push away the pigment, right? So if you keep messing with this, it's not going to dry right and you're not going to get the effect. But when this is dry, it's going to look like little crystals or like little snowflakes falling down, which is kind of neat. So once that salt's on there, don't touch it, let it dry. I'll show you a picture of what it looks like dried. Awesome. And our last technique is my absolute favorite. We're going to be using rubbing alcohol. All right, so we're using, just for clarity, just regular, like, first aid antiseptic isopropyl alcohol. This comes in different percentages. Anything over 70 should work really well for you. But the higher the percentage, the stronger the effect is going to be. So I usually take this and put it in a separate container with a lid. If you are doing this in the classroom, please make sure that this lid stays on at all times. When you're ready to use it, you can take the lid off, and as soon as you're done, put the lid back on. This has a strong reaction with watercolor, which makes it cool, but that's also what makes it dangerous. If you spill this on your painting or someone else's painting, you're gonna ruin it. So please use this responsibly. Okay, so we are going to start once again, like with the salt texture, with a dark, wet wash. So you're gonna grab, again, wet brush. I'm gonna choose, this purple worked well last time. Oh, that's a lot of pigment. So again, if you're like me and you've got too much pigment, we're just gonna come in here with just pure water and water that down. Oh, that's so much better. See, you can start to see a little bit of the white paper through. That's what we're looking for. Awesome. All right, friends, so back to our checklist. Step 1, when we tilt it, do we see the light? Yes, we do. When we hold it sideways, oh, there goes my salt. Is your pigment running? So if I hold, oh gosh, you can't even see me. If I hold this sideways, can you see? There it is on the corner there. My pigment is starting to run. That means your pigment's floating around in your water and it's ready to go. If you're worried, just take a little extra water and put it on there. There you go. Once you see that pigment floating, you are ready to go. So the key to the rubbing alcohol is making sure it's wet enough, making sure you have your pigment, but also don't use the same brush. The reason is because this brush is filled with water, and if you put water in your rubbing alcohol, it's going to water it down and your effect won't be as striking. So I like to use a separate brush off to the side. I really like using an angle brush. You can see how it's got like a little angle here. And that works really well because you can also use it to kind of splatter. If you are splattering near other people, please be careful. You don't want to splatter this stuff on someone else. But again, now that I've got my wash down and ready to go, I'm now ready to open up my rubbing alcohol. Remember, that lid's going to go on as soon as we're done. You're just going to dip your brush in here and check this out. 2 different ways you can do this. One way is to hold your angle brush, let's see that, sideways with the long side facing you. You can kind of take your thumb and pull back. Check that out. You get some little speckles. If that's not working or you want a more striking effect, you can take your brush and poke. Check that out. Isn't that cool? Beautiful. Now again, if you're in a classroom environment and you are sharing this rubbing alcohol, don't put this brush back into your water until you're done using it. So keep the brush out, pass it to your neighbor, and then once you're done with it, or if you're using it by yourself, once you're done, then you can put it in the water. Lid back on. Awesome. So now you have 6 different techniques, 3 for painting, 3 with texture. I hope this helps you kind of elevate your watercolor game a little bit and give you something fun to play with. We will have more texture techniques coming once you're ready to move on to something a little more advanced. So enjoy, have fun. Remember to tag us, show us all your cool work that you're making, and I hope to see you soon. Until next time, keep on creating.